This is a video for the laboratory of Unit 1 for 3D modeling and animation. The first thing to do is to find Adobe Flash Builder 4, which on our machines normally has a desktop icon. It will also be on the Program menu within your Start menu. So here it is, Adobe Flash Builder 4. I've already got one running, so I'll maximize it. And the first thing to do is make sure that you have got the default perspective. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into Window, Perspective, Flash, and Window, Perspective, Reset Perspective. And now I know that I've got the standard perspective with left-hand side the Package Explorer. In the center where we've currently got the Start page, that's where I would normally edit the code. And on the right-hand side I've got the properties of any components that I select in the application. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project by right-clicking on the Package Explorer and then New Flex Project, and I'm simply going to call this Flex Project 3 buttons. I'm going to use all the defaults, so I'm going to simply hit, and now what it's going to do is it's going to create our MXML source, which you can see here. I'm not particularly interested in the declaration, so I'll remove that, and you'll see it's a very skeletal outline at the moment. On the left-hand side, we've got the Package Explorer, which shows you the directory structure, our parent directory of 3 buttons, the source directory, within that the default package, and there's our source file, 3 buttons MXML. Alright, so we're going to switch now into design mode, and what this will do is it will show us a pictorial view of our application, and on the left hand side you will notice that we've now got access to a whole load of components. We're going to select the button component and drag and drop it to the application. And on the right hand side we now have all the properties for the button application, button component, and we're going to give it an ID of simply B1, and we're going to call this button 1, like that. Okay, now you'll see that the label is now 1, and as we mentioned the ID is now B1. Alright, so what I can do is I'm going to drag 3 buttons on here. I'm going to give them all similar IDs. This one is B2, and I'm going to call this 2. And then what I'm going to do is take the 3rd button, drag it up here. You'll notice that the guides are helping you positioning it. This one's called 3, and the label is going to be 3. Right, so I now have 3 buttons. I would like a label as well, so if I scroll down to the label function, I'm going to drag that and drop it roughly into the center. I want this to be nice and big, so in its properties I'm going to make its font size 36. I'm going to give it an ID of L1. And now what we can do is we can switch to source mode, and we can see that we now have the appropriate XML source. And this is really just a layout language which is saying we've got 3 buttons and a label. Now what we can do in here is we can add some actions or some behaviors in ActionScript. So now I'm going to type open angular bracket, it's C for short for script. I'm going to hit return, or I can select this up here. I can then close the bracket and it automatically puts in the rest of the syntax for me. Now what I can start doing is adding some ActionScript. So I'm going to add some private functions here. So here's our first private function. This is going to define the behavior when we click button 1. So I'm simply going to call it on B1 click. Now this is an event handler, so it is provided with an argument. I'm going to call it E. It's of type event. And you can see here how the proper syntax for it. It's capitalized on the first letter there. I'm going to close the brackets. I'm now going to say that it's going to return nothing, so it's a void function. And I'm going to open the curly braces, hit return, and we now have a behavior. The behavior we're actually going to define is we're going to say that the label L1, we want to set the text property of that equal to a string. In which case, we're just going to simply say 1, and that's the end of that function. Now what we're going to do is we're simply going to replicate that function, and we're going to change it appropriately so we can have it later for B2. indicator for B3. And although we've got these functions, we haven't yet connected them to the buttons. So in order to connect them to the buttons, we need to specify that the click event is going to be connected to this on button B1 click. So on B1, and if I hit Control Space, then it will complete it. It knows that there's an on B1 click function, and it knows, and I have to put in the arguments here, which are, I happen to know that it's one argument which is type event. I'm going to terminate that with a semicolon. I could miss out the event argument here. That's very misleading, because what will happen is it will compile, or certainly under Flex 3 it compiled, but it didn't actually invoke the function, so that was really confusing. So make sure that you put this event argument in here. And now what we can do is we can run this by clicking that green button in the top left-hand corner, and if I hit button 1, then you can see that we've now got the correct behavior. Of course, button 2 and button 3 are doing nothing because they're not yet connected. So what I need to do is I need to specify this behavior here, and I'm simply going to copy and paste. I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to copy and paste the behaviors in here, but of course what we have to do is we have to change that to a 2. Similarly here, Control V, we're now going to have 3 different behaviors invoked. We run it again, and here we've got 1, 2, 3 behaviors, all modifying our label. I'm going to make this use an alert, so I'm going to type in alert, Control Space again. It tells me that it's capitalized. I'm going to use the show method in here, and you can see that it's brought up the code hinting, saying that I need a couple of strings. The first one is the content, and I'm going to find out what's in this event argument here. So I'm going to use the E as the identifier, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use its toText function. Oops, yes. It's toString. Here we go. It's the toString function, and the other argument is the title of the alert bar. So as the title, I'm going to put B3 alert. I'm then going to close the double quotes, close the parenthesis, and put in a semicolon. And now, if I run this, you will see if I hit B3, I now get a very nice alert. You'll notice it's dimmed and put out of focus the rest of the application, and the title is B3 alert. And E, the text that's come from E, tells us that it's a mouse event of type click, and that it's occurred at a particular X and Y position. So that's fine. We're going to close that down. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use the debugger. In order to use the debugger, I'd like a little bit of code, so I'm just going to invent some code in here. I'm going to have a new variable, I, of type int. I'm going to initialize that to 0. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to increment I, and I'm going to copy and paste that several times. And here we go, so that we've got a bit of code to inspect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click in the margin there, and what's happening is that's placing a breakpoint there. Now what I can do is I can run the debugger. But I happen to know that the plugin versions of the Flex player that I've got in the system don't run the debugger. I will need to use the standalone debugger. So if I go into Project, Properties, the compiler, I'm going to untick the HTML wrapper. All right? So we'll no longer generate the HTML wrapper. And what that means, it will run the Swift file directly. In order to run the Swift file directly, what it will do is it will invoke the standalone player, and it won't bother with the browser, the Chrome browser. So here you can see the Adobe Flash Player 10 is running directly, and we still have our behaviors as we had them before. It's just that we don't have the browser. This means that it also invokes more quickly as well. Now, what I can do is I can go here and I can run it under debug mode, and it will invoke the Flash player again. And notice that I can still do the old behaviors because the breakpoint is in the event handler for this button here. Click C, and of course it throws me straight into the debug mode of the Flash Builder. Here you can see in the main panel, in the code panel, where it's actually stopped, which breakpoint has been invoked. On the right hand side here we've got the values of the local variables. I, of course, is yet to be defined because we haven't actually executed this declaration statement now. So if I single step this, so if I go into run, I'm in a variety of single step. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use F6 here, and I step down one instruction, and you'll now see that I is initialized to 0. If I hit F6 several times, it goes to 1, 2, 3 as we go down through the code. Right, and that's basically the debugger. It allows you to inspect variables, put in breakpoints, etc. And it's really quite a powerful debugger, and it's the only way that I've found of debugging XML, because the runtime constructs can get quite complex. Right, that's really all I wanted to say there. If I go back to the default perspective now, but first what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the application from running, because it's still running in the background here. There's the application, it's still running. It won't actually respond to me because it won't respond properly, simply because it's running under control of the debugger. So I will go into here and I will stop it. That's terminated it. I will now go into Windows, and what I will do is I will go back to the perspective, which is a Flash perspective, but there is a shortcut up here, and what we can do is go back into the Flash perspective. Another handy hint, which is in the code window here, if you've got a small screen area, then what you can do is you can double click this and it will expand that to maximize it. Double click it again and it restores the value, the environment that you had before. That's really all I wanted to say. Here you can see what we have is we have got our structure for our application, 3 buttons, and we've got the 3 buttons.mxml, even though I spelt it wrongly without a double E in the 3. And that's the end of this lab. Thank you very much.